Welcome, Ahmet Demirden, to this version of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. It's a great honor for me to have you on the podcast. And you and me know each other quite well now, but maybe you can introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do to our listeners.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ivar, for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here as well. Yes, my name is Ahmet Demirden. I am currently with Hamburg College Criminal Justice Degree Program in Canada. Well, I am a former police officer with Internal Police Service, worked there for about 10 years. And my interest in investigative interviewing started as a police officer. I wanted to explore evidence-based practices. And I did my master's at Brock University on the peace model versus the behavioral analysis interview in the United States. And then in about 2016, I decided to move into academia. So I got my PhD in psychology, moved back to Turkey, worked there for about 8 years at Turkish National Police Academy. And that was a great opportunity where I got involved in in-service training for many police services around the world through international police academies, various international organizations, and also some judicial organizations as well. Yeah. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really glad to be here.
Thanks a lot. Such an exciting background. And like myself, you also have this practitioner and academic combination, which I think is really interesting. And is also one of the ideas with this season that we want to talk to people who also have a foot in the camp of the police or the prosecution service, or who actually can see a little bit from the inside, because we can all agree that there are many good ideas behind the scientific development here, but theory and practice is not always that easy to combine.
Yes, absolutely. In some cases, it's a legal context. In some others, it's organizational variation, or it could be interpersonal or personal factors that can greatly impact the quality or effectiveness of interviewing in any given context.
I guess so. I think, like in life in general, there's a lot of circumstances that that have to play together to get things moving. But maybe I could ask you, Ahmet, what would you say is the ethos of investigative interviewing? What is the kind of the value system, or what do you kind of think about when you define that?
I think right now we have a kind of universal understanding of the concept of investigative interviewing. Like in my experience, I've observed right now around the world, we all accept, for example, respect for human rights and dignity, seeking the truth versus focusing on obtaining confession and transparency and accountability. Like these are not only, ethics, but also they're like legal requirements. I see it in both inquisitorial or adversarial justice systems, or to gather admissible evidence in court in investigations. And also that's the expectancy of the, by the public. I think it's very clear, like again, human rights, dignity, seeking the truth, and transparency and accountability. These are given. And I think there's no kind of among practitioners or, academics, a disagreement on the importance of any one of these. But also perhaps we need to focus on, the practitioner's motivations in investigative interviewing. So now it's my psychology side talking. Like in general, because we've seen over and over in many jurisdictions, there are still some challenges. Yes, we have a great model, like a peace model here in practice for many years now. There's a great deal of research on the effectiveness of interviewing, but still we still face certain vulnerabilities and challenges. I think we also need to look into, motivational aspect of investigative interviewing. And we have a theoretical framework in psychology I, strive to use. Like in general, people have different regulatory focus motivation. That is, some people are, they're more tend to have promotion focus, whereas others, they have more like a prevention focused tendency. So let me explain to you, how it can be related to investigative interviewing. So, for example, some investigators, they may focus on obtaining confession, not because they have something against the person, suspect, but it's because they might see defined objective as a goal that something needs to be achieved. It's like, major object of the investigation or interviewing is to obtain confession. This is more like a promotion focus, whereas other investigators, they may tend to focus on admissibility of evidence. Okay, I'm gathering information here, but it's got to be admissible in court. So it's more prevention focus motivation. Like, I think overall, what I've kind of come to the conclusion is that yes, there are some bad practices in investigative interviewing, but they are not necessarily related to individual officers' ill intentions. It's not all about bad apples. And the promotion versus prevention focus is a kind of personality trait, but it can also be primed. Like promotion focus investigators, they are found to be motivated by advancement, accomplishment. It's like, okay, we need to move forward, such as closing a case. I need to find out whether this person is a suspect or person of interest. How am I going to define it? And I need to do it more, as a promotion focused individual, I might feel like I need to do it quickly. Whereas prevention focus motivation involves more like safety and obligation, such as it may be related to paying closer attention to fulfilling transparency and accountability. Typical behavior of promotion focus is risk taking, such as, in a suspect, there's an evidence against them when there is not. And as I think, as we will discuss shortly, some jurisdictions allow that. Tricks and lies or like deception is legal to a certain extent. Typical behavior of promotion focus investigator is more like risk taking, like eagerness, right? Well, that typical behavior for prevention focused person would be more vigilance, caution, adherence to rules. I don't know if it's kind of drawing a better picture, but see, like these individual differences are not necessarily related to a specific case. It's our tendency, how we, interact with our social world, if you will. So I think, again, it's very important to note that this variation, this individual variation is, yes, to a certain extent, a personality trait, but it can also be primed. So in my in-service training activities, not only, we obviously focus on knowledge, which is important, but also attitudes needs to be addressed. Competency needs to be addressed. Officers feel competent. Did they buy the effectiveness of the method? And of course, do they have the skills to implement that? These three ethos, like human rights, I think there's no person in academia and practitioners around the world this day can say, well, human rights is not important in investigations. I mean, it's a given. Seeking truth, yes, it's a given. But the question is, how are we going to operationalize? How can we facilitate the process for officers to actually implement practices in investigative interviewing based on this ethos? So I think that's important.
That's a really interesting way, and thank you, Ahmed. I think you are definitely right. You have to. There's a why dimension. Like me, if someone tell me, Ivar, you should stop brushing your teeth with your right hand and start using your left hand, I would really much like to know why.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you know from your experience, police officers are often asked to follow orders that they may not have the chance to question. Not all the times, but it's just, they got to do what they need to do to operationally active throughout their days. But that doesn't mean their kind of attitude is not important. It is vital. And that also, I believe, needs to be addressed too. Not only knowledge. I mean, my limited experience, I've been now working in the field like close to 20 years, and 12 of these years are in facilitating trainings. It's very rare that I see the practitioners do not know what they're supposed to do. They know it. But in some cases, they may feel like, well, if the person is innocent, why would they lie? I wouldn't lie. Well, you may not, but people have different motivations to give, for example, false confessions. And again, just, on a side note, I think this concern is not limited to a specific geography. So based on my experience, I'll give some examples from a number of jurisdictions, but I think it's a global issue around the world. Like if you go north, south, east, west, effective investigative interviewing is important, and equally important is how do we define the concept of effectiveness?
Absolutely. And of course, it reminds me, of course, what you're saying, that we also have to recognize that we all human beings are goal driven. Sometimes these goals are obvious, like we talked about you playing football with your son this morning. I was catching lobster with my son this morning. And then you can discuss what is the real goal, Ahmed. Huh? Is it football or is it just to do something meaningful with our family?
Absolutely. That's a bang on example. Absolutely. And like when it comes to investigative interviewing, as we discussed earlier, yes, we still have challenges, but we have come a long way though. I remember back in 2006, 2007, there wasn't any kind of formal training on effective investigative interviewing in North America, at least. There is this model read behavioral analysis interview, and we know how evidence-based it is. But the goals and motivation not only drives individuals, but also organizations. Like, let me give you another example. Like right now in law enforcement hiring process, many police services are utilizing a personality test, MMPI. Okay, so as a psychologist, I know it's not a valid or reliable test, but it's a civilian, a psychologist, given his or her opinion to a police service, so that kind of shifts their accountability and say, hey, we made the decision based on the expert. But the challenge doesn't also, it's not even limited to policing, it's also in like general judicial system, like risk assessments. We can talk about it, entire day. We know unstructured risk assessments are not effective, but they are being implemented over and over. We have known it since 1970. They are almost like flipping a coin, but still being implemented. Absolutely. Like the goals of, like, this is a part of our investigative interview, like a workshop. When a suspect is being interviewed, yes, that person is a suspect, but also that person is a member of the public. So when you are interacting with that person, you are also communicating with his or her family, relatives, friends, and portraying a message, how your law enforcement practices are being implemented in a given jurisdiction. So the goal is now it's compounded. It's not only about investigation, but it's also public relationship.
It is. I was wondering, you mentioned you could have, and I think it was an interesting perspective. You said you can have a preventive or promotional mindset. If you take us back to Turkey and your experiences there, I don't know how far back you want to go, but go as far back as you feel like. What would you say would be the dominating culture there amongst the police or the detectives, as far as you know it? Preventive or promotional?
Well, first of all, just to give you like a kind of general framework, Turkey has an inquisitorial justice system, so it's a little bit different than North America and UK. I think and in investigative interviewing, it's actually the prosecutor that they are allowed to interview suspects. The police officers, they also interview suspects or witnesses. However, that interview is on behalf of the prosecutor. So they are following their guidance. And it's interesting. So legal framework, if a person gives a statement and their lawyer is not present at the time during the interview, let's say they don't have a legal counsel, they have a legal right to recant that statement in court. So that sounds great, right? I mean, when you think about it, unless you have your lawyer and they take a statement and you want to change it later on, absolutely you can. So I feel like that practice created an environment in which officers might feel or interviewers might feel, well, that person, if he or she wants to recant it, they can recant it and they have a lawyer. So now it's on them to kind of give legal advice or protect the, suspect's rights, whatnot. So there seems to be an attitude shift on the responsibility on the side of the officers. So it's, however, like I haven't looked into research, but I also would be, very interested to find out when the suspects or accused, when they go to court, they recant their statement. What is the impact of that action on the verdict? Because we might, like you said, we are human beings, so are the judges. Right? Once you hear someone's confession, and they say, well, I want to recant it, by regulation, you might say, okay, we're going to take it out, but now you know it and you can't unknow it.
It's like they say in England, you can't unring the bell.
Exactly. I mean, with all due respect, and this is the challenge of forensic psychologists working in the criminal justice area, from all the way back to Hugo Massenberg, the first forensic psychologist coming to United States. When you try to tell the judges what they are doing is not scientific, they don't really like it, right? But we know, for example, research shows the level of blood sugar, meaning whether they are hungry or not, can impact their decision on bail hearing. So we know they are human beings. This is, I think, apparent protection may actually backfire on the officer's vigilance on the investigation, because now it appears that the responsibility is shifted to courts or legal system. It's like almost like, well, I'm just gonna take your statement. You wanna recant it. That's your right. Here's your lawyer. You got him or her. Now, vigilance is not my responsibility. But overall, I would say, again, this is not a research finding, but my anecdotal observation: officers appear to be prevention focused, but how is it being? How do they act upon that motivation? How is their behavior is impacted? Is a bit different because there's a shift of responsibilities, like as I said, and that's why it's important to also realize, like, individual officers' tendencies, motivations, their skills, their competence, confidence, very important, but they're acting in an like organization in a judicial system. So they're only part of the system. They can motivate, kind of impact that system to a certain level, but it's the entire system how what's going to come out as a result of the investigative interview.
Based not on research, but based on your personal knowledge, has there been cases in Turkey where there has been miscarriage of justice or other kind of scandals linked to police interviewing?
Well, like, the investigative interviewing is the responsibility of the prosecution office. So I know it's a bit different than like North America. So the officers are actually following or conducting the interviews on behalf of the prosecutor. Has there been an incident of false confession? Absolutely. Like, I mean, I can't recall a case right now, but I'm sure there have been. Even, um, you know, but see, the challenge is here a bit different. Like in North American context, when a person gives a statement confession, provided that the confession is voluntary and they are given their rights to counsel, they don't have to have a counsel with them. And if there is no signs of coercion, physical or otherwise, that's an admissible evidence. So that, and later on, that evidence may be found to be as false confession. But I don't know how many, but I know, like, at a regular, practice, the offenders recant their statements. So it may not even enter as a false confession as evidence, because they have the right to say, I didn't have my lawyer with me at the time, so I do not accept that statement. What I'm saying is that may not be even good enough protection law. So, it may not turn into a false confession, but the fact that a decision maker, trier of the facts, like the judges, hear that statement being recanted might impact their decision. So, by in official records, you may not have a number of false confessions because it may not even enter as such as evidence. But here, in this context, the challenge may be a bit more complicated than false confession.
Exactly.
Does it make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. And it's many countries who have the same way of organizing it, that the prosecution are actually responsible and the police are acting on their behalf. But again, as I said, I think if I define investigative interviewing, is not only about, it's what we talked about, it's also about relationships, isn't it? It's about how you are relating to your own citizens. So
Absolutely.
regardless of the court outcome, they will also do something with the way this person was interviewed. He will think in a certain way about, how did this police officer treat me? If you think more about that relational side about it, what would you think then, look in the back mirror of the importance of investigative interviewing in the Turkish context?
I think right now, like, policing practices, I want to say, moving towards like a value-based policing. You know how we used to kind of focus on community-based policing, which is also important, but that relationship with the public is not only in Turkey, but also in Canada, in United States and other parts of the world as well, becoming like kind of paramount objective of policing. And that relational um, importance of the investigative interviewing is um, also recognized. However, again, we need to look into the realities of, for example, caseload. If an officer is in charge of 300 cases pending, and I would love to have them, for example, report building, with open-ended questions, like investigative interview techniques, but only if they have 15 or 10 minutes. How practical is it? What is interesting is that I find in my, experience is that similar challenges seem to come into surface, whether it's like a Turkish jurisdiction or Canadian jurisdiction or like any other continent, where there's an individual differences between officers. They are human beings. They have their like challenges or opportunities in life as well. There is an organizational demand. On top, there's a societal demand, and everything is going on around the globe might impact them locally. And we rightfully expect them to be motivated on like a relational policing or value-based policing. It's gonna take some time to kind of prioritize that objective. It's just survival instinct, Ivor. First, I want to be safe. That'll be my first survival instinct on duty. I want to come home safe and sound, not only physical, but also psychological and legal. It's only after that safety is provided, then I may focus on investigative priorities. Because the chances are my supervisor, however, they may also state the importance of relationship. Chances are they are going to focus on operational objectives, such as number of cases being closed or handled. Right now, I'm working with local police service in Canada to evaluate the effectiveness of their training. And it's like a 3-year project. The preliminary findings suggest the training is up to date in their training facilities. The training is up to date. The training officers or instructors are competent. The officers, they increase knowledge, competences, skills, and everything. But what appears to be lacking is the required drivers on the job that monitors, supports, reinforces, and rewards good practices. In general, the research suggests the training impact is about 15% on job performance. Meaning 65 comes from required drivers, like relational policing or value-based policing. You know, in Turkey or Canada or anywhere else, not only requires training, but also, as I said, required drivers, which I think need to be developed and prioritized. But we need to also be cognizant that we may end up asking too many things or too much from the officers too, right? Like, I mean, we need to be realistic. Like every year, I don't know if you noticed, but so I left Canada in 2017, came back in 2024. I see the officers are carrying more tools and equipment on their vests, and sometimes I wonder when it's gonna stop. Now they have body worn cameras. Now they have different like less lethal use of force options, and it's getting bigger and bigger and heavier. And we also need to be cognizant of that as well.
I think you're right. I think also it's interesting if we talk about investigative interviewing again, we talk about the ethos. I think also there's another aspect to it. At least I don't know if you agree, but for me, as I've been reflecting about it, it's a shift, and it links very much to your opening here about whether you are promotional or preventional, that within the professional point of view, there is a process quality focus.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. Just I want to be clear that regulatory focus, I mean, we won't be able to cover that in, a few minutes. It's like a major area in social psychology, thanks to Higgins. But absolutely, it's more like vigilance, right? And vigilance comes with, procedural attention. It's almost like not, I want to get this, like I want to get information, I want to get the truth. It's more like, okay, how am I going to get it? I don't want to make a mistake. Whereas the promotion focus is more like, let me try it this way, didn't work. Okay, let me try it another way, some other way. I just want to get it. It's more for, not vigilance, but more like in, focusing on a goal and trying different ways and means for the objective. And again, for the clarity, I'm not suggesting this is the major factor in decision making. Absolutely not. But I think it is significant. It impacts our ways of not only decisions, like our cognitions, but also behaviors. It's almost like if you're a vigilant person and you are holding a hammer, you're going to be careful and try very, with vigilance, hit that nail to avoid hitting your hand. But if you have the promotion focus, okay, you know what? Let me put the nail here. Bang, didn't work. Okay, let me try it again. I'm going to just keep my hands out of the way. So it appears to me, that switch can help with like investigative interviewing practices, or it's something that we need to explore. Overall, more than that, I think we are at a point at the conceptual level, there's a consistency and agreement. The ethos of investigative interviewing, importance of the report building, like we all know it. Now the question was, how are we going to make it a skill, and how are we going to change an attitude? Like some people believe it's an innate ability. Like you are a good talker and you should be able to communicate. Well, we also know there's like a skill aspect though. Some individuals, they might feel like, and for a police officer, for example, in Canada, like testimony in court is a challenging process. It's a challenging process for anyone, even for expert witnesses. So officers tend to have the prevention focus to prevent like difficulties or errors in the future. Where we are at right now in investigative interviewing area is perhaps we need to now more focus on the attitude change, competency, and confidence of the officers. This is individual level, but at the organizational level, we need to have required drivers, and I'm borrowing this term from Kirkpatrick model of train and evaluation. We need to have these required drivers to observe, monitor, um, and support, reinforce, and reward good practices. It's amazing to find out that in many cases, and this is not that local police service here, but many other police organizations too. I found out it's either too expensive, or perhaps it's not practical, or perhaps it's not something that's being prioritized. But for various reasons, there are no operational required drivers for performance. Training is given, whether it's use of force or whether it's investigative interviewing. Okay, go in the field. If there's an error, it's going to come from the court anyhow, right? It's sufficient. It's not going to be an admissible evidence. But I think we should go beyond that and have focus on required drivers, not only for the purpose of successful prosecutions or truth seeking, but also and absolutely with paramount importance at relationship building with the community.
Absolutely. It could be I was thinking, I think it's a really interesting analogy you make there, because when you say driving, I also think about shooting and other activities that are relatively easy to measure if you do it right or do it wrong. If you keep that vehicle on the road and don't kill anyone and get safely back, you probably did it well. If you can hit this target within the blacks area, you did it relatively well. And I think what I reflected on when you said that, is that maybe we also need a little bit clearer definition of when are you a good interviewer and when are you hitting the targets and when are you not, so that we perhaps could more easily give them a certificate. Listen, here, Officer 1, you did really well. This is why. Officer 2, sorry, we can't give you the certificate right now because you need a little bit more training on these two items here. And if we had the right organizational culture, which is obvious when it comes to driving and shooting, we wouldn't let that officer do any interviews.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned like organizational culture, as it's important. Again, we've seen the cultural shift or change in, for example, mental health. It used to be, and again, Like I feel like fortunate to be able to relate to many different jurisdictions, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It used to be like, okay, you are an officer, you need to be tough. So don't whine, don't complain. You just got to keep going because you're a police officer. You are the best of the best, right? And from this mentality, now we are in a position where, okay, officers also need support. They're also human beings. Why don't we support them in any way, shape, or form? So in investigative interviewing, I think in this area, because the results are not immediate, the feedback may not be immediate. Like when I first, as a police officer interview someone, I thought, but again, this is like from 2006, the way back. I'm sure it's changed now, or I think it might have changed. But I was hoping someone would review the recording and give me some feedback. No, I had to kind of ask for it. This is what, I mean, required drivers. Like when it comes to or support mechanisms for investigative interviewing. Because if I mess up in an investigative interview, it's going to go to court. The case will be dismissed, and perhaps my organization might not even hear about it. And either, like the investigative interview challenges are real and everywhere. Like one local police service in the GTA in 2010, I believe. So they interrogated a witness. Don't get me wrong, not a suspect. The witness was interrogated to turn her boyfriend in. And it was like, and it was all recorded. It was all audio and video recording was there. The witness was saying, "No, my boyfriend wasn't there. I didn't see anything." And they threatened her. You are a single mother. You have a child. Guess what's going to happen right now? You are obstructing justice. We're going to charge you with this, that. Like it's like on the record. How that interview was carried out was unbelievable. But what happened? The case was dismissed in court, and that incident became public because it was a homicide investigation. The accused was released, but that was it. No more follow-up that we know of. At least the public didn't know any other additional follow-up out of this. But if it was a vehicle collision,
Yeah.
okay, if it was use of force that turned out to
Yeah.
be illegal, so see the outcome would be immediate, and immediate feedback might create some attention and a follow-up. I feel like still we have way to go
Yep.
to make it clear the importance of investigative interviewing, at the organizational level, so that the culture is perhaps going to shift a little bit more towards evidence-based investigative interviewing.
I was thinking that maybe because we talk about a car, we talk about a gun, and these are technical stuff. So you will see, you will clearly get the feedback. As you said, I think
Yes,
the key word, feedback. You clearly get the feedback if things go right or things goes not so good. Could technology in investigative interviewing help us towards getting better feedback?
absolutely, yes. This is another project that we are working on with Dr. Nicole Luke at Brock University. Well, now I think we have the technology to use as a tool, at least at the training and later on follow-up phase. Whether the technology is going to be related to VR or AI for like AI agent for a feedback. Again, like when I suggested perhaps the officers' interviews can be reviewed by a senior or veteran officer for a feedback, we also need to be realistic. There's officers, they may not have the time and luxury to do that. However, if you have, of course, there's like legal challenges here that need to be overcome too. AI can facilitate that. AI agents definitely can facilitate that. But first, we need to have the motivation to look into it. I think it's coming, it's on the way. But like you said, hard skills, like technical skills, are easier to observe and measure. But soft skills, they are not that easy. Verbal behavior is relatively easy to, again, observe and measure, evaluate, and feedback. But when it comes to paralinguistic variance, when it comes to like a micro, for example, aggression, body language, like these are all part of the communication channels. They are not that easy to observe. And I think that's why some people think communication is an ability, not a skill. Investigative interviewing is ability, not a skill. Investigative interviewing is a skill and that can be improved. You may not be the fastest runner in the world, but you can improve your running.
So I'm at least optimistic when it comes to also here the role of technology. Let's say we when we do go for weapons training today, we use simulators because you can't really risk to send people out without having a certain idea whether they can handle not only the shooting track but also the situation. And maybe we could move forward in our community to see if we can create simulators that also estimate whether you are a safe interviewer or not.
Absolutely. I think following up with the research around the world, and on a side note, it's interesting when you meet with international researchers or practitioners. It's interesting to observe the same concerns, the same principles. I think 2021 or 2022, I visited Oslo for a workshop on investigative interviewing. And it was amazing to see, like, without any collaboration, pretty much we were talking about the same thing. On the third day, the participants were like, you are not the same team, but you are talking about, well, because research findings, indicate the same direction. So same ethos, same, principles were discussed from different points, but this is encouraging though. And I know technology, now very, tech people are also working on this. It's going to come and it's going to greatly facilitate the implementation of the investigative interviewing techniques, effective techniques. Just on a side note, because I use the concept effective, operationalization of the concepts are paramount too, right? What is effective interviewing? For some, getting confession. For some others, getting as many interviews as possible or closing cases. So we need to kind of, work on the operationalization of these concepts and see how technology can facilitate to reinforce that concept.
I definitely think so, and I definitely think if. May I ask you a question? If we move back to a Turkish context, how widespread is recording of interviews, you think, in Turkey today? Is that normal or less normal?
I am not sure. Actually, there's any research I'm looking into that, but I think there's a variation. A recording usually occurs as like a written statement, but then the suspect or the person of interest and their legal counsel, they would review that statement, whether sign or not sign, right? I think though, like recording statements is obviously very important and paramount, but some challenges, as I indicated earlier, goes beyond recording of the statements. Again, these statements, recorded audio, video, or written statements, because they can be recanted in court on the first appearance.
Yep.
They may not enter as evidence in the first place. So they may not appear to contribute to miscarriages of justice or false confession-related convictions because they are not entered as evidence. But it needs to be looked into. Okay, how do they impact the decision maker of the judges?
I was more thinking as a database for learning, because if you want to develop, like we talk about the technology, that can give you a simulating environment. The more data we have on real life interviews from recordings in different jurisdictions, different cultures, different situations, if we put all that together, we will be able to test what kind of interview behavior is giving you positive outcome and what kind of interview behavior is giving you less positive outcome. You can say drives you off the road. So I think that's why I wanted to know, are they actually recording the interviews? Because that will be the most valuable data source.
Interviewing is the communication, right? So there are, I think, local variations as well. So I'm not sure if there's like a universal set of behaviors or verbal cues or, paralinguistic or body language cues that can be developed, but I think they can all be operationalized at a local level, either technically, like interrogation, for example, in Canadian context. Technically, it's investigative interviewing, not interrogation. But we know when the objective is obtaining confession, no matter what you call it, it becomes an interrogation. In Turkish context, technically, the only authority who can interrogate a suspect is a court. Like there's a court judge in a courtroom, the prosecutors or the police, like law enforcement agents, they are technically not interrogating individuals. Having said that, when you listen to interviews, you can easily detect, okay, this is an interrogation because your objective is getting confession, because you are introducing false evidence here. Each jurisdiction have, I think, strengths and weaknesses. The introduction of false evidence is legal in Canada. It's illegal in Turkey. However, um, so we can kind of perhaps develop a universal set of principles, but also we are working in like a given jurisdiction and like, legal framework. And at the end of the day, the law enforcement prosecutions, they work as kind of like court agents of the courts. And some of the challenges involve sometimes the judicial system. So I'm trying to be careful here because, again, forensic psychologists, they have challenged courts and the outcomes were not that pleasant in the history. Like judges everywhere, they are professionals, they are, like objective triers of the facts. So I think with the investigative interview practices, we also perhaps explore human aspects of judges as well. Like, I think we've come a long way to recognize the human aspects of law enforcement officers, but judges are also human. They also have cognitive biases. I'm not talking about racism necessarily. Like, as I said earlier, your blood sugar level as a human being can and do impact your decision. So we need to explore that as well. And my experience in both Canada and Turkey and other jurisdictions as well, police officers may be more receptive to training, to have experts, academicians come in and talk to them than judicial authorities. So it's like, as investigative interview relates to criminal investigations. For example, in Turkey, I think the lawyers also, they need to get training on investigative interviewing because you are representing your client in an interview. It's not a given, like it involves skills, right? You need to understand the process of investigative interviewing to represent your client. But generally, lawyers, they might think, well, I know it. I know the law. Well, it's not about the law. It's about the relationship, right? For judges, if you were to ask them, well, it's that simple. You are allowed to recant your statement. Your rights are protected. I don't know. We need to look into it. Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps not. If it isn't not the case, then we need to look into the ways to improve it.
Time is flying, Ahmet. I have to say, this has been a really eye-opener for me. You brought in some new perspectives here that gave me a lot. I also hope our listeners find it really interesting.
Oh, it's always a pleasure chatting with you.
It's fantastic. And I also have to say that it's been a unique opportunity to also get a little bit of your perspectives from Canada, but also some of your inputs on the situation in Turkey. And thanks a lot for comparing those. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. Again, thank you very much for your podcast and for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure.